That means over here, the order, Marie-France, Emanuela. We have with us the Parliamentary Budget Officer today, who's known quite well to a number of us, along with Mr. Penny and Mr. Solomon. Welcome to the committee. You have provided us with a fairly provocative report, which, well, maybe it's not provocative. I don't know. Maybe it'll be very simple. But I thought that instead of the usual 5 minutes that we give to a witness, and in light of the fact that we have you for a couple hours, that it would be useful if we took the first 10 minutes and had you go through the report and explain it, and then we'll go to our usual rounds of questions. So with that, I'll ask you to present in the fashion you see fit. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting us to appear before you today. As you mentioned, Mr. Chair, I'm joined by, or maybe you didn't mention it, I'm joined by Christopher Penny, Advisor Analyst, and Binyam Solomon, Special Advisor on the report you are considering today. In accordance with the PBO's legislative mandate to provide impartial and independent analysis to help parliamentarians fulfill their constitutional role, which consists of holding the government accountable, my office published a report in September entitled A Force Structure Model of Canada's Military Costs and Personnel, which I didn't think at the time would be provocative, but if it is provocative, so be it, Mr. Chair. First, I'd like to explain why we have produced this report. The government produces or provides a range of analytical and reporting frameworks, such as the public accounts and the main estimates, which offer valuable insights into past and projected expenditures. The Departmental Results Framework, or DRF, or even DERF for those who are more intimate with it, takes this a step further by associating spending to measurable goals and effects. However, while the DRF establishes a relationship between expenditures and the strategic outcomes that are served, it combined results across multiple military branches with intermediate outputs, such as expenditure on training and infrastructure. The DRF, therefore, does not enable the assessment of recurring operating expenditures on individual military capabilities, such as, for example, armored battalions or naval surface combatants. Je vais maintenant poursuivre en français.
I will now continue in French. Our force structure model fills this gap by providing an overview of the annual recurring operating costs of Canada's military capabilities. Our model consists of an independent estimate of such operating costs for 21 military capabilities identified in all branches of the Canadian Armed Forces. We divide the costs into direct, indirect, and overhead categories to more effectively understand the percentage of expenditure that enables the use, support, and sustainment of a given military capabilities versus the percentage needed for a capability that is a constituent of the force as a whole but does not in and of itself generate an independent military impact. The model also includes estimate of staffing numbers associated with each capability in terms of direct, indirect, and overhead costs. This makes it possible to estimate operating costs and personnel numbers for each capability. Lastly, in the tool we've created on our website, a user can increase or reduce the capability of air and naval forces to see what the direct and indirect impacts will be. Independent effects would involve support vessels, and overheads would include spending at headquarters, and see the impact of increasing direct capability on costs as a whole as well on staffing levels. As you may know, the force structure model has been published on our website. It is available to the public. We've created an interactive tool with which users can perform portfolio-level trade-off analyses across military capabilities, displaying changes in recurring costs and staffing numbers resulting from user-defined changes within the forces structure. This is the first publicly available model of its kind in Canada, and it is proving very popular. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This completes my opening remarks, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
So let's go to our first round. I think it's Mr. Brazan for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the Office of the Parliamentary Budget Officer for being here today. I do appreciate all the hard work that the PBO does and keeping us as parliamentarians informed. And I appreciate the report that you just filed. So we have LAP spending. We just saw in the public accounts that were tabled this week, another $1.5 billion down. And $2.5 billion before that, both of those big LAP spending, $4 billion plus under Minister Anand. And now we also know of these, as we've heard at testimony here just in the last couple of weeks, the recruitment crisis that we have, 16,000 troops short, 10,000 under trained and undeployable. The Liberal government has undermined the Canadian Armed Forces. How, if we increase numbers and get money back to where it's supposed to be, even if the government would just hit their budget numbers before they take this $1 billion cut out of this current year, where would, in your mind, the ratio be tooth to tail? You're talking, about a third right now of actual direct military effect. If budgets were met, if troop strength was up, would that ratio change significantly?
It would depend where the money would be spent. But if you're talking $1 billion, $1.5 billion per year, I don't think it would change the ratio significantly. It would move it a bit, but not that much. Okay.
So I found it interesting that the ratio on the Canadian Army is less, like the tooth-to-tail ratio is worse than it is for Navy or Air Force, which I found, to me, it's counterintuitive. I would expect that it would be more expensive than for direct military effect to put, fighter jets in the air, ships to sea, than it is to put a soldier out in the field. So why is it that we have so much more overhead costs and indirect costs tied to the Canadian Armed Forces and the Army?
I got it. Okay.
So for the Canadian Army, we have a greater quantity of what we call indirect capabilities. For instance, armed reconnaissance regiments, combat engineers, engineering support regiments, and such, which are, of course...
You don't consider that direct military
These are indirect. They're deployed as part of a force mix.
Have you ever seen combat engineers, how they operate? They go right out into harm's way.
I have
like they're part of the
no
fight.
reason to disagree with what you're saying. We follow the convention that was set forth in the strategic cost model, which was DND's own framework, dating back over a decade now. And also we follow the conventions established by the Congressional Budget Office.
Okay, so the Congressional Budget Office also has provided this type of modeling that exists already down in the States, and we're just adapting that and applying it to the Canadian Armed Forces?
In so many words.
Okay. I noticed that you put Canadian Rangers as their own military effect, I guess, but their own capability. Did you guys do an analysis of reserve forces versus reg forces?
There is a breakdown within the model. It's not displayed as part of the tool. As you can imagine, there are only so many axes by which we can offer that level of detail and that level of granularity. But I would say that reserve forces are fully accounted within the model.
Okay, so on their ratio of tooth to tail, how does that compare, especially since most of our reserve forces are Army Reserve, not there is, of course, Navy Reserve units as well, but on the Army Reserve units, what would that tooth to tail ratio be versus the Canadian Army, worse or better?
I can certainly say that of the reserve personnel that we have, many of them are attributed to direct. I don't have a breakdown, however, of the reserves, whether they're direct or indirect. I think Mr. Solomon might have something to add.
Yes, so as you pointed out, the Army basically eats up about two-thirds of the reserve force we have is essentially Army, and a good chunk of the remaining is the Navy, followed by the Air Force. Now, the the reserve force is essentially treated as basically providing support to the direct elements. But if we were supposed to integrate them as part of the direct, you might get the ratio higher. But in order to remain consistent in our modeling strategy to match with both the Congressional Budget Office and past D&D experience, we left them out. But and your analysis would be pretty much correct if we decided to include them as part of the direct.
So when we look at tooth-to-tail ratios, Canada versus our allies, did you guys do an analysis of where we stack up?
I believe the Congressional Budget Office figure shows tooth-to-tail, well, I'll say proportion of 41%, so it's more than one-third. Looking at the UK, the most recent estimate I could find is from the middle part of the last decade, but it's also exactly 31%.
Okay, so where's the sweet spot then? If we're going to reduce that tooth, or reduce the tail, like, and get more teeth, get a bigger bite in our fighting capabilities, where's the sweet spot? Where do we do the investments? Air Force, Navy, or is it in our military, our Army?
So it's the way you
Mr. Brazan has asked an extraordinarily complicated question right at the last minute, literally last seconds. I'm going to let that go because we do have these folks for 2 hours, and I'm not going to be hard-nosed, but I just don't want to get abused if I tell you that I'm not going to be as hard-nosed as I usually am. So I think this is an important question, and I'm going to let it go, even though Mr. Brazan is way past his time. Please.
Yeah, so in terms of the tooth-to-tail ratio, you have to sometimes understand, sometimes people use the analogy of an arrow. Sometimes you want the shaft, you need a bigger support in the back in order to make sure that your fighting age is quite capable. So you need to have a certain amount of overhead and indirect support. So the tooth-to-tail ratio is an important way of looking at how much is being put on the overhead, but sometimes some capabilities actually require a good amount of support as an overhead. Imagine, for example, even within the Navy, the Air Force, some of the Air Force capabilities have to be basically included in there, and Air Force would come with their own set of supporting elements. So sometimes the tail needs to be bigger. So we don't usually say that there is a fixed, this is the goal to achieve, but we have to always make sure that there's enough reasonable amount of overhead to go with it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brazan. You should be thanking me, actually. Yes. Madame Lalonde, 6 minutes, please.
I was under the impression it was Mr. Collins, but
No? I'm sorry. I'm reading from the wrong sheet. Yes, Mr. Collins. Sorry. 6 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I hope you can hear me okay. Thank
Yes.
you. Mr. Chair, when I've read past PBO reports, this one's written a little bit differently, and I missed a portion of the opening there, so excuse me if this was answered in the opening statement. But, I'm at a housing conference here, and they've referenced a PBO report. Coincidentally, this morning, they talked about a housing report that was done. Participants here talked about the rental construction financing initiative and the positive critique that the PBO referenced there in terms of affordability and why the government should make some changes and tweak that policy as it relates to providing support for housing providers. And I use that as an example right now in my opening question because this one's written a little bit differently. It doesn't reference existing policies or it certainly highlights budgets, existing budgets, but it doesn't provide recommendations in terms of making changes. And traditionally, PBO reports do that, and they do that for different constituencies. They certainly do that for us in terms of allowing us to reflect on some of the policies that have been implemented and changes that we might want to make in terms of making them better. They do that for our constituents. That's a great example I just provided, I think, in terms of I'm at a housing conference and they're referencing a PBO report and some of the changes that were highlighted in that document that I referenced. And of course, our bureaucracies use these reports, I think, for the same reasons and rationale in terms of making changes. So this one is written a bit differently. I didn't see those recommendations. I didn't see the comparisons that Mr. Bazan just rightfully raised in terms of how do we compare to other countries. And those are the types of things I think that we're accustomed to seeing in many of the reports that come out of PPO. And so my question would be, who's this report written for? And how is it to be used? Is it to be used by the bureaucracy in terms of, I would have to guess that when it comes to trade-offs, those that create our budgets are well aware in terms of increased support in one area, you may have to decrease in another area because budgets are finite. And so can you help me with that in terms of who are the sliding scales for? Are they for the public to go online and play with them to, if they're going to advocate for more in a certain area within the defense budget, here's where I'd like to see it because I've utilized this tool that you've provided online. I wasn't certain after reading this report twice in terms of why that was created and who's the intended user. And sorry for that long introduction and anecdote.
Well, thank you. That's a very good question and an interesting one. And that allows me to explain a bit more and probably a bit better why we did that report. So this report, as you pointed out, is written differently because it's meant to be a companion to an existing or something that we released at the same time, which is a tool on our website intended for parliamentarians and their staff, and also for Canadians, to allow them to look at what happens if you increase or decrease some military capabilities, how much it costs, and how much it requires in additional personnel, both in direct capabilities, but also the indirect capabilities. For example, field hospitals, if you want to increase the army, or and also the overhead costs that are accompanied by this increase or decreased military capabilities. So that's why we wanted to have that tool. We wanted to have parliamentarians have that capacity to look at the impacts of varying 21 military capabilities. And that's something that's not available right now by DND. So we wanted to have that tool available for parliamentarians so that they can play with the various capabilities. It's not perfect by any means. It's based on historical data, the most recent years, 6 years. So we looked at that and we reconcile all these various objects, like by line item, made that fit into the 21 capabilities, both direct, indirect, and overhead, so that parliamentarians and Canadians can have an idea as to the costs and the military personnel required or freed up if you vary the capabilities. For example, direct regiment capability, how much more or less money is needed directly, but also to support them, and as well the personnel, but also the costs.
And so I had an opportunity to look at the DoD's same version online. And I understand that you have an international component, sir, to your job in terms of meeting with your counterparts, looking at what they're working on. Where did the request come from internally or domestically here? Is it something that you witnessed that they're working on in another country, United States, prime example, and you thought this would be a useful tool here? Or did someone request this in terms of there's not enough transparency, not enough budget information online, the public is clamoring for this? Of all the things you could have worked on with your limited resources, why did you go down the path of providing this tool?
So it's something that we identified as a gap in information and that was available to parliamentarians. We identified that as a gap before I was appointed. So it's something that was on our work plan the moment I stepped into the job. However, there were a couple of events that prevented us from working on this issue, notably the pandemic and the fast pace of reports that we had to produce. So that's why this was put on ice for a number of years, unfortunately. But with the pandemic receding and Mr. Solomon becoming available, more available than he was before, we asked him to come back and complete the work that we had done because we had identified that as a gap, and also because of the sustained interest on the part of parliamentarians for information on anything that relates to national defense. For example, the moment we release a report on D&D, be it on the operating or capital spending and the strong, secure, and engaged capital plan, or surface combatants, there is tremendous interest in our reports. So that's why we thought it would be advisable to provide that tool for parliamentarians and the Canadian public to look at different permutations for their own interests and for the purpose of government holding the government to account.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Madame Normandin, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Director, it's always good to have you with us, to have the PBO with us. I want to make sure I understand what you were saying. When you move the cursor on the model you provided, you can see the changes and the impact on direct and indirect costs. If I understand the impact of one of Mr. Bazan's question, there is no precise number that appears when you make changes. You kind of see a sweet spot. Is that the same thing for each capability? That is a question we wondered ourselves. There's good linearity in the online tools from -25 to +25%, that range. If you go beyond that, that's where the linearity starts to break down. That's why we keep to adjustments of plus and minus 25%, because in that range, the linearity is there. But if we go beyond that, be it too high or too low, we lose the linearity. And then we can see either a complete breakdown or an exponential increase in some capabilities at the indirect level and in overhead costs. Thank you. I had another question regarding the definition of direct and indirect costs. I'm surprised to hear that combat engineers are part of the indirect costs. Can you give me a description of what a direct cost is? These are the costs that produce, the indirect costs produce no military effect, but what's a direct costs? You've also made comparisons with other countries. In doing that, do you use the same definitions? For the U.S., I believe it is, but does that also apply to other countries? Regarding definitions in other countries, to my knowledge, not many countries provide this kind of information. We did talk about the U.S., which is an allied country, and on which we rely for national defense in many cases because they provide a great deal of information, particularly the Congressional Budget Office does. Chris and Binyam might have more information on comparisons with other countries. I can give you an example of a direct capability. Combat vessels, for example, we might say that destroyers are an example of direct capability, whereas support vessels, like the Asterix vessels, would be indirect capability, even when they are in combat and active zones. So the combat vessel is direct capability, and the indirect capability is whatever provides it with support. Comparisons with other countries, Chris?
Direct versus direct capabilities front. In particular, I think it's not to demean a capability if it's indirect. It's the point of delineation that we've used and implemented in the model is it something that is typically deployed as part of a force mix, or is this something that can be conceivably deployed by itself? I think reasonable people can have disagreements on that front. With regards to the international comparisons, I believe this is actually an import from both UK and US military doctrine. But perhaps Mr. Binyam Solomon could.
Yes, so what we mean by indirect is essentially when you go on a combat mission that you would need these to go along with. It's like a force package. Which one is the most lethal aspect, which is the one that would you use typically for combat and for actually doing the, lack of a better word, the killing, and who is basically providing you the support. So sometimes we have decided to include under the indirect not only capability combat engineering support, but we sometimes even include reconnaissance, even though some reconnaissance items might be employed to do combat or killing. They're primarily used as a support unit that you send together. So think of it as a force package, an indirect. It's not really an overhead when we're talking about an indirect. Over.
Merci beaucoup. Peut-être sur un autre.
Thank you. On another line of questioning completely, when Ministers Freeland and Anand announced $15 billion in cuts across a number of departments, to what extent can the Parliamentary Budget Officer be involved in impact analysis? Is this something the PBO can do? Or would that require you to break confidentiality? Do people make use of your office in the impact analysis of cuts? That is a role that can help parliamentarians. We have not to date been consulted. I'm not surprised, because the government needs to do that work within some cover of confidentiality. But once the work is completed and once more detail is available, we are planning to examine the potential impact these cuts might have. Minister Anand had given the department up to early October to submit the plan, so decisions will no doubt be made in the coming weeks. And once they're made, we will begin to see how we can provide you with relevant data and analyses. Thank you.
The committee, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Pleasure to be here. And thank you to all three of you for being here today. Back in 2017, I had the pleasure of being invited upon HMCS Vancouver, one of our beautiful frigates out on the west coast, and they took me for a sailing to show me its capabilities. And for anyone that's been on the frigate, while it's pretty much ready to go, it's got a very, very large crew to make that ship work. I mean, it's a 100-meter long ship. And I know that a frigate, of course, is classified as a direct action capable. It's capable of many different roles. But of course, the personnel aboard that ship serve many different roles. Some you could look at their job position and argue, well, that's an indirect, or they are helping sustain the ship. So in your classification system, you're essentially looking at the unit as classifying. So everyone on that unit, no matter what their role, because it has a direct role, they are going to be classified under that cost. Am I reading this right? Is it the same for the Canadian Army and for the Royal Canadian Air Force?
Yes, so the personnel numbers are basically, as you indicated, on a ship, you would have those that are going to be providing some sort of overhead or indirect activity. That would be all determined by the expenditure data that we received that we could map into something called the frigate, which would have its own specific cost center or data point. Now, the personnel one was a bit of a challenge for us, so we had to actually use other external information as well beyond DND, just to make sure that those numbers that we're using are also publicly available and comparable. So while the methodology you described is essentially the same as what I described, there might be some nuances in terms of making sure that it's part of the publicly available information. So sometimes you might have some extra people that should have been labeled as base employees, or sometimes the first direct maintenance work that is done by for the ship when they are on board or traveling. Those would sometimes be tagged to a base or a fleet maintenance facility personnel. So we had to make some adjustment on that.
Thank you. And I'm substituting in on this committee, but I was just curious when I was looking at the the ratios between direct costs, indirect costs, and overhead costs for the 3 branches, and of course joint. Are you aware of just how those ratios compare with the NATO average or some of our closest allies? Are we an outlier in any of these? Is this comparable across the NATO spectrum? Did you have that information at all?
I don't have a breakdown of by direct, indirect, and overhead other than what's available from the Congressional Budget Office, but there is nothing.
Okay. So, venture there.
No, just to clarify, what we mean by there is nothing is,
Yeah.
with the exception of United States, which is willing to provide that kind of information publicly, not a whole lot of nations actually have been able to break it
Okay.
down in that fashion. So.
Okay. The next question I have is specific to my riding. My riding is Cowichan Malhett Langford out on Vancouver Island, so we are very much oriented towards the Royal Canadian Navy, especially in the south end. Many of my constituents are either full-time service members or civilians working at CFB Esquimalt. So I understand in your report why you needed to exclude new major capital expenditures like the procurement of new military systems. But, you know, in my riding, like, we know that the wait list for service members and their families for military housing is close to 700 at CFB Esquimalt. And we know that year after year with successive governments, they've kind of punted that critical maintenance and new building expenses to prioritize some of the mega projects like the F-35 procurement. So, you know, we have a lot of military personnel and their families suffering as a result. We have not had those increases made to those budgets. But I'm just wondering, can you tell us why the report does not include modeling for the increases to things like the Canadian Forces Housing Agency? Is that not something you could make a link to personnel costs? I mean, it's such a vital and an important thing, especially for constituents of mine.
That's a good point, and that speaks to the exclusion of major capital expenditures in the report, because major capital expenditures such as housing, but also frigates or fighter jets, these are expenditures that are for decades. So it would be quite difficult to include an accurate cost of the capital expenditures necessary to increase or decrease specific military capabilities, and also the various types of expenditures that can sometimes depend on policy choices, whether it's housing that's provided on base or whether that's provided off base. So that's why we have not included these types of expenditures.
But just as a quick follow-up, would that not sort of affect your personnel costs? I mean, if the personnel are having trouble housing themselves, that's a cost they're having to bear, which, you know, indirectly I think may affect the Canadian military.
Yeah, it's obviously something that military personnel, if they have to bear additional costs, it will have an impact, negative impact on the capacity of the Canadian Forces to recruit, but also to retain their military personnel. And that's probably a very different issue than just the tool and the model that we have built.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Mr. Kelly, 5 minutes.
Thank you. And before I get into questions about this report, I have a quick question that I would like to get some assurance from you in your office. We had testimony just on Tuesday that the procurement ombudsman does not have sufficient funds to do his job and perform do the reviews that he is so his office is supposed to do. The Defense Ombudsman's office has said much the same. We've seen the shameful refusal to fully fund the Office of the Auditor General. Does your office have sufficient funds to do the important work that you do for parliamentarians?
That's a question that I'm glad to have, and I'm also glad to be able to say that I think we have the resources that we need to fulfill our mandate. Of course, if somebody was willing to double my salary and expand my office, I would not say no.
And you're funded by. I do want to move on quickly to the report, so that's good. Okay. I'm glad to hear that. You're funded though by the House of Commons, not through finance. You don't
exactly.
Have to go. Okay, I think that's the difference. So. Lapsed funding is something that has, I guess, has always existed, but has really become quite a significant number. How does lapsed funding play into the ratio? So if there is failure to execute and actually fulfill the expenditures that are have been authorized by Parliament, how does that affect the ratios? Where does that lapse to? The money that isn't there, how does that affect the numbers in your ratios?
Well, in our tool, we're basing it on 6 years of historical data. So the lapsing wouldn't appear or would not affect the numbers that are in our report or the simulations that one can do using the online tool. It would, however, affect Canada's capacity to meet the 2% target under the NATO commitment, but it would not affect what's in the tool.
Okay. Examples then on, just to help us understand, because I've shared some of the maybe lack of fully grasping the report in the way that some previous questions had. For example, in the Air Force, refueling, the aerial refueling would be, sorry, the parlance is just lost on me for a minute here, but you've got the fighter jet itself, you've got refueling, and then you've got overhead. Like what a hangar, is that overhead or is that indirect, or what is that?
So the fighter jet would be direct. The refueling in flight, that would be indirect because that's helping the fighter stay in the air or complete its missions. The hangar could be direct if it's to house the fighter jets. Could be indirect. I don't have that level of detail, but it certainly wouldn't be overhead.
Okay, tell us about overhead then, because that's the whole point of the report, I think, is to just demonstrate what an enormous expenditure there is in overhead. So people think about the direct and indirect costs when they think of where a military budget goes, but it's actually mostly going to overhead. So what are the examples of overhead?
So examples of overhead could be our contribution to NATO, like financial contribution or in-kind contribution to NATO. Could also be research and development that's done at DND, the Department of National Defense. It's also parliamentary affairs or the civilians that are working at HQ. So if you drive by Colonel Bai Drive here, you'll see a big building, and that is in good part overhead for military capabilities.
Okay, I think that this tool is very helpful and might be very illuminating for many Canadians that have questions about how military budgets are spent. There's a crisis of recruitment and retention. We're having trouble filling the positions at every stage, whether they would be really under overhead, indirect, or direct. Maybe I'll give you some more time too on what's partly Mr. Bazan's question about how the inability to get people into these key roles plays out in the ratios and our ability to have direct capability.
Well, it's clear that the capacity or incapacity to recruit and retain military personnel affects the capacity of DND or the Canadian Armed Forces to deliver on its mandate. It's not affecting the ratio and the tools that we are providing here, but I think this tool can give an example as to what if, for example, the Navy increase its uniformed personnel by 1,000, the Army by 1,000, and so on. That'll give users a good idea as to how much that would mean in terms of increased indirect and direct or overhead costs. But the lack of the absence of a full contingent at this Canadian Armed Forces is not affecting the simulations themselves or the results that one would get.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Fillmore, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Merci, Monsieur le Président, et bienvenue, Monsieur Girard et son collègue. I'm joining you from sunny Halifax.
Ravi de pouvoir participer à la réunion aujourd'hui.
CAF. So by its nature, we know that this force structure model is but a snapshot. And for example, what I mean by this is that one of the assumptions in the model is that it estimates its estimates reflect a steady state cost. It assumes the military will continue to operate in a similar manner in the next 6 years as it has in the past 6 years that are in the data in the report. But it's just not clear to me how we can use a model like this to understand the emergence of new threat environments and new operations in new theaters like Indo-Pacific or Ukraine or now Israel, Gaza, nor is it clear to me how we can use the model to understand new and emerging CAF needs, like the emphasis on culture change or more costs on recruitment, retention, infrastructure needs as examples. So I wonder if you could tell me to what extent do you believe this model accurately and effectively accounts for the complexities in the modern Canadian Armed Forces and the DND as it stands today?
That's a good question, and it allows me to explain the capacities of the model, but also its limitations. So this model is based on the most recent 6 years of available data, and in that sense, I think it reflects pretty well the state of the world as we know it and as we knew it fairly recently. And it can be very helpful in projecting in the near future what could be the needs and what would be the costs and the needs in military personnel to adjust at the margin for some of the 21 or all of the 21 military capabilities that we have in our model. What it doesn't do, and it's not intended to do, is indicate what types of resources and the number of these resources Canada needs to face emerging threats. For example, how much it would cost to send Canadian Armed Forces in the Middle East or additional support to Ukraine, because that would not be specific military capabilities. So that would also be highly contingent on government decisions as to what to send and what type of support to provide to these two regions, for example. So it's a good tool to adjust capabilities minus 25%, plus 25%, or anywhere in between, but it's not intended to project the costs of doing something that has not yet been done or where discrete decisions would have to be made as to the type of interventions to make.
Okay, thank you for that. Your office has made an investment in creating this tool. I wanted to ask you about the magnitude of that investment, if you could just tell me that.
Yes, so we used data that was provided to us free of charge by the Department of National Defense, and we also needed to have somebody help us. So it probably involved 3 months of somebody working full-time, and we also had to contract for a value, I would say, of probably off the top of my head between $15,000 and $30,000. So that would be the extent of the cost of this building this model.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. So to protect that investment, then, do you have some strategies in mind to keep the tool current, to update it as we go forward, periodic updates, usage monitoring? How do we keep the value of this investment moving forward?
So it's probably a matter of getting updated data sets from the Department of National Defense and refining the model depending on any changes or any hiccups that we or somebody else finds in the model. We've already had discussions with the Department of National Defense. They had some caveats along the lines of what you mentioned, but the cost of maintaining it going forward would probably be minimal compared to the cost of establishing the model.
Okay. I think we're going to be out of time in about 10 seconds, but maybe in some of the future responses, you could try to help us to understand what methodology was used to decide on the 21 capabilities that were covered, because there are some that are missing, like the Canadian Forces Intelligence Command is missing. So maybe if we could try to uncover that methodology, that would be helpful too. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Fillmore, Madame Normandine, 2.5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you. First of all, Mr. Chairman, the interpreter is saying that when there is an open mic in the room, there's too much background noise for interpretation, so we missed the beginning of Mr. Fillmore's comments.
Je reprendrai.
I'll go back to the line of questioning I was on initially. Your analyses are based on decisions made. Your recommendations are based on decisions made by acquisitions and defense, procurement and defense. Can the PBO also work on hypotheses, hypothetical decisions that departments could submit, or is that beyond the PBO's mandate? Might you be consulted by departments before they make decisions? That is something we could do. We can use hypotheses in our analyses. We do that with our budgetary and economic projections. In our long-term projection of the financial viability of government budgets, and when we publish reports, we often have alternative scenarios so that parliamentarians can have some idea of what might happen if the government's direction were to change. So we can absolutely use hypotheses and work with the government. What we generally don't do is make recommendations on public policy. For example, should the government not implement a national pharmacare program? We can estimate the costs. We can work on the basis of hypotheses to estimate costs using a variety of scenarios. In overheads, we've understood that there was a great deal of bureaucracy involved in military procurement. Does that administration, like assessing calls for tender, come under overheads, or does it get included into procurement costs? There are two things that should be explained or a distinction made between them. Procurement as such isn't in the model, but the Minister of National Defence will have procurement in its overheads.
2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. In your model, there doesn't appear to be a separation of personnel between public and outsourced. And I want to make that point. Because the Union of National Defense Employees, they had an Uncover the Costs report. They found staggering evidence that the rising outsourcing of operations and sustainment in the Canadian Armed Forces is actually costing more to the department. So if we have a situation where outsourced contractors are costing more than maintaining the good union jobs on base, I'm not sure how the model can be effective if we don't delineate the costs between outsourced and in-house work. Can you tell this committee your thoughts on the impact of the more expensive outsourced contracting in your model, and maybe why there wasn't a delineation? Any thoughts you have on that?
Yeah. So in our model, the costs of the outsourced expertise is in, but as you pointed out, we don't factor in the personnel. So the costs are there, but when you look at the personnel impact, it's not there. And it's because it's difficult to determine the full-time equivalent or the impact, the personnel impact of contracted out expertise. But contracting out expertise can be done for a variety of reasons to get expertise that does not exist within the Canadian Armed Forces or DND as a department. It could also be because it would not be advisable to develop that expertise in-house, for example, if it's necessary for a limited period of time. Or it could also be related to the fact that that expertise is difficult to retain, as we have seen with the difficulties in the Canadian Armed Forces in reaching their targets. So that's probably as much as I can say, not being deeply involved in the day-to-day operations of the department and the Canadian Armed Forces myself.
Just very quickly, where's the difficulty lie? Is it in you trying to obtain the data from the department, or?
I wouldn't say it's difficult to obtain data. It's probably difficult in getting that second-hand information from the contractors, because it's not something that is perceived as pertinent in all cases.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Ms. Gallant, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the 2022 budget, there was an unexplained $15 billion earmarked for our military that was described as a big black hole because we couldn't figure out what it was for. Was this money spent that you know of, or do you know what happened to it? Does it show up anywhere?
I don't know exactly what you're referring to, but when we ask information to the Department of National Defense, we get the information that we need. So you may be referring to referring to the capital expenditures. So I'd have to look at the specifics of that billions of dollars.
Well, could you get back to us on whether or not that $15 billion was spent, and if so, how it was spent? In August of 2021, the CAF acquired 4 new and fully operational simulated urban training sites at Gagetown, Valcartier, Petawawa, and Wainwright, and that was as part of the Urban Operations Training Systems project at a cost of about $500 million. Did your analysis for 2023-24 include the approximate $15 to $20 million to cover the software renewal for this fiscal period? Because the program has not been renewed, and they've shelved this capability.
So we looked at historical data, and the most recent year that we had, I think, was 2021-22. So we would not have looked at anything that's beyond that for the purpose of establishing this model.
Okay. So at your last meeting here in June, you said the shortfall for Canada to get to NATO's minimum 2% threshold was between $13 to $18 billion. What, if anything, has changed? Have we come closer to that mark?
So for the current year, when we did that report in June 2022, we estimated the gap would be $15.5 billion in 23-24. If anything, that gap has widened since because of the way the GDP and the spending has evolved at the national defense.
So that excludes that $15 billion that's missing as well. Okay. What was the biggest contributor you've determined for the disproportionate cost just to keep our 4 submarines barely operational? And really what I'm looking to do is understand how we could calculate the cost of waiting to acquire a new fleet of submarines versus pouring money into keeping the hand-me-downs we do have afloat.
It's a question that is of great interest to me as a taxpayer, but unfortunately my office and myself have not done a study or a report on the submarines. Not yet.
Okay, so last week at this time, I was at base Petawawa on the plains, and we had the engineers out there, and the CDS was there taking questions. And one of the soldiers asked, when are we going to get our drones? Like, I think they started asking for them in 2003. And that was Predators back then. And then he goes, well, that's the answer you gave me last time. And so he asked it again. And he said, same thing. That's the same answer you gave me the time before that. And the time before that. So this soldier's been waiting over a decade for the Predator drones, and now they're being set aside for a higher, more costly drone with more capabilities. How would we use your tool to calculate the cost of, again, just getting what we can in terms of Predators, because they are still available? India's buying them, and UAE, versus waiting and paying for more, yet albeit for something that has more capabilities.
So because the tool is based on historical data, if it's a capacity or tools that are not existing at the Canadian Armed Forces, the tool would not be helpful in determining the cost of waiting or acquiring equipment that the Canadian Armed Forces does not already have, unfortunately.
Okay.
Just for purposes of the record, Ms. Gallant's first question had to do with a $15 billion hole. Do you understand what it is she's asking for at this point?
I'm not 100% sure, but if I had to summarize that, I would probably assume it's based on the capital spending of D&D that was not according to the initial plan under strong, secure, and engaged.
So it's important that Ms. Gallant and the PBO understand what it is she's looking for. If that could be,
Explain a little further, Mr. Chairman, just for the purpose of following up.
well, as long as why don't we leave it that you can explain it to him offline, and if that should be helpful. So, with that, Ms. Lambropoulos, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. So thanks for coming to help clarify certain things and help explain this new tool to us. When looking at the website, I noticed that some of the capabilities that are listed have that range of 100 plus minus 25%, and some don't. I'm wondering if you can explain what the difference is here, why, for example, the Canadian Rangers, the Arctic Offshore Patrol Vessel, Coastal Defense Vessel don't have anything to, a sliding scale there.
Yeah, so we refer to these as blocked, so there's not that much that can be done for these capabilities. And in these cases, it's because moving the slide or the scale even a little bit would get us out of that linear relationship. So, for example, for some capacities, if you try to decrease it, you'd get to zero pretty quickly, or you'd have a ratio that wouldn't be sustainable. You'd get virtually zero capacity, but you'd be stuck with a very high ratio of indirect and overhead, so that wouldn't be very helpful. Same if you were to increase it by 25%, you would probably need to incur significant and disproportionate capital expenditure. So the tool wouldn't be that helpful in these cases, and that's why these capacities are locked.
And in terms of why these 21 military capabilities were identified, is there a rationale? Is this just what there is? Is like to the average Canadian, can you give some rationale as to why these are the ones listed?
Sure. These are the ones that are relatively, and I say relatively, easy to understand, but also easy to measure. And they're probably the most widely known and available in the Canadian Armed Forces.
Now, I noticed that you also, you kind of deemed the Rangers non-essential, and there are some that are more essential than others in the capabilities and in the different categories. And so I'm wondering what the rationale is, considering the fact that, they were essential, especially during the pandemic. They were dispatched to long-term care homes, and obviously they do a lot of incredible work in their own communities in areas where you wouldn't necessarily want to send the forces, but they know their environment. They're the ones who are protecting certain areas that others that the forces aren't necessarily protecting in other ways. So I'm wondering why that one was deemed less essential.
So we didn't pass judgment on capacities that are essential or not. We leave that to those in charge of determining Canada's military needs and capacities. So we may have labeled some as direct or indirect, but I don't think we have labeled anything as essential versus non-essential. So there may be some miscommunication or maybe some typos in the tool or the report. But Chris is kicking me under the table, so I don't think there's any typo. No.
If I can just add, the model is, and the way we built it, it's completely agnostic as to whether, a given capability, whether it's direct, indirect, or overhead, is essential or not. In fact, everything is assumed to be essential, that you need the overhead, you need the indirect in order to have the direct. Like that.
One other question in terms of indirect and overhead, because Mr. Solomon gave a bit of a clarification earlier and said, for example, that the cost of the combat engineering support that would be sent along would be an indirect. So what would be considered overhead, and what's the differentiation there between the two?
You want to give it a try?
So a typical example for an overhead, let's take any of the Navy capabilities. So an indirect capability will be a fleet diving unit, a unit that would be going along with the ship. So eventually, when we have the JSS, for example, the Joint Support Ship, that would be considered an indirect because you need them to be refueling while they are on a mission. But the overhead would be items like the fleet maintenance facility that stays offshore doing the work, the maritime command, the executive overhead that would be sitting at Halifax or Esquimalt or in DHQ. Those would be the overhead we're talking about in that case.
Much.
Yeah.
I think we've got time for one more 5-minute round. So let's start with Mr. Bazan.
Thank you. When is the so this report and this model is going to be hopefully a living document, or that you guys can update the information. So now that the public accounts have been tabled, the 2022 financials are out there, you can input that data in here and update the model?
We could, to the extent that the level of information at the granular level that we need is available by D&D, and to the extent that we can reconcile it with the standard line objects or the line items that we have in our model.
Because this is only good if it's got current data in it, right? Yeah. Because once it stales, it's garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah, it becomes an interesting intellectual exercise,
Right.
but not much more than that.
When is the F-35 report going to be coming out? I know you've been working on it. Can we expect it soon to be tabled here so
Yes.
we can have you back?
Hopefully next week.
Next week. Okay, awesome.
Late next week.
Okay. You also talked about the two, whether or not Canada's ever going to get to the 2%, and you're saying that the gap is widening. So you did your report on NATO's 2% spending target in June of 2022. Are you going to be updating that? Because already, if you look at the charts you had in there, we were supposed to be, at 1.33. We missed that mark. We're supposed to be this year at 1.46, and you're saying we're going to be significantly lower than that. So, any plans on going back and updating that data set and
Not in the near future. We're focused on F-35s and then the capital spending at D&D under Strong, Secure, and Engage, updating that report. For the 2%, we also are a bit held hostage by the availability of NATO definitions and updated numbers. But it's something that is of keen interest to parliamentarians, and it's not in the near future, but it's not never. So probably sometime in the next several months.
Okay, so going back to your force structure model and talking about the tooth-to-tail ratio, some people would say the tail is fat and the tooth is lean. Where can we cut the fat without affecting the tooth? Because there's always the issue around sustainment, and you said certainly some of the overhead is necessary. So were you able to identify through this process what's this? Is there too much bureaucracy? Are we top heavy? Do we have too many commanding officers, flag officers, general officers?
We looked at historicals. We looked at the numbers that D&D provided us, and we reconciled that, and we tried to all tie the little nuts, the wire, to ensure that we had a good tool. But we didn't look at whether all the numbers were necessary, all the overhead and indirect were necessary. That was way out of scope of that report. So all that to say, I can't answer that question because I'm not... we have not done that kind of work, looking at everything with a very critical eye. Is it absolutely necessary?
Okay. So when we start looking at the issue of procurement, we've been talking about this now for some time at committee, and there is dollars tied to it within Canadian Armed Forces. And there's no doubt that for whatever reason, the big ticket items definitely give us bigger tooth to tail ratios. Surface combatants are going to really change that number dramatically. New fighter jets will change that number dramatically, which isn't necessarily the same for putting boots on the ground in the Army. So when you're doing this process, are we talking about that the U.S. numbers are higher because they have a more robust Air Force and Navy versus Canada to get to 1.4?
I would suggest that they have certainly a higher rate as regards the total of force employment. That the operations rate is much higher in the United States, and we could also talk about their higher end systems costing more on like a flying hour basis, let's say. So recurring variable costs, which is what the model does.
Do you know if the United Kingdom has a similar process?
Does not exist as far as I know.
Thank you, Mr. Rouzan. Madame Lalonde.
Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais vous remercier de votre...
Thank you. I'd like to thank you for being here, Mr. Giroux, with your team. I have a number of questions that are linked to a number of answers that you've given. So bear with me. Quickly, if I understand correctly, you're using a U.S. tool that you adjusted to create your Canadian tool. We used the U.S. classification to determine what was direct, indirect, and overhead costs. We built our tool on the basis of those classifications, of those categories. I'll come back to one of the questions, or answers rather.
Capabilities that are being used in these tools. One of my colleagues did mention the Canadian Armed Force Intelligence Command was not considered, which I think this week particularly we saw its importance within the framework of what's happening internationally. Is there a reason why we did not use this part of this tool?
Well, it was considered, but we have some limitations when it comes to using information for public consumption, and it's classified. So it was considered, but we didn't want to disclose. Well, we understand that DND was not very comfortable with us disclosing that level of detailed information.
I appreciate that answer, actually. Very quickly, we've been asking a lot of questions, and I think this is new. It's a new tool, and you were referring that it is popular, and that's, I'm just wondering, was that something that parliamentarian asked you to initiate, or senator, or a DND himself? And then what is the targeted audience for and the intended outcomes? And I would really like to know that, and also the maintenance of this tool. Who's going to do this?
So it's something that was not specifically asked. I don't remember one parliamentarian asking me to develop this specific tool, but it's something that was of keen interest from many parliamentarians in both chambers. How would that cost to increase, decrease, modify this, add that many CF personnel in that area? So it's the result of many questions that were asked to my office and my predecessors over the years. So that's the genesis of this report. It's intended for parliamentarians, like all that we do, first and foremost, MPs, senators, and those who are courageous enough to support them, but also Canadians, because what we do is always available to the public. But first and foremost, parliamentarians. The cost to maintain it should be minimal because we run a lean operation, our office, and as I mentioned before, the cost to maintain it, aside from hosting it on our website, is updating it, which should be done within existing resources in our office.
And if I may, I'm just curious quickly, because I know my time. Is there flexibility in adjusting based on information that people may want to have available, or other parliamentarian that way? So is there flexibility within these tools to modify it?
We always aim to provide parliamentarians with information and analysis that is useful for them, but also accurate. So if there are suggestions from parliamentarians, we're very happy to take that into consideration and adjust as necessary to meet their needs.
Oh, okay. Well, then let's wait. Well, I'm going to ask just in case one of my colleagues wants to ask anything, or are we good? Can I continue? Chad?
Not anymore.
Oh.
2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I understand that the data used for your model cover the past 6 years. So it's fairly contemporary, and it does represent what is happening at present. However, I would like to hear you on how you took into account attrition among forces personnel that can have an impact on subcontracting for maintenance and so on. So to what extent has going back for 6 years perhaps made it difficult to see how things are now? Or is attrition really not that recent a phenomenon, and does it perhaps not have that much impact today? That question takes us back to the accuracy of the model. We are using historical data dating back 6 years, so it is contemporary, and it reflects the status of the Canadian Armed Forces over those 6 years. Now, is attrition making things less precise? As I said, the model is based on recent years, and it is also designed to make projections for the few years ahead. So we don't expect massive changes to be engendered because of attrition. We designed this for short-term projections. Just to have a good basis for comparison, would it be useful to go back and see what ratios were like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or even further? Would that provide a good basis for comparison, and would it not be too much, too costly in terms of time and energy? My colleagues on either side of me would either beat me up if I suggested such a thing or leave. This would require tremendous amounts of time and resources.
2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Canadian Armed Forces has its own unique national healthcare jurisdiction, and I'm aware that this committee just completed a study which I think is going to include a lot of different recommendations on how to improve and expand the coverage for CAF personnel and their families. A model like this could be really helpful to understand the impact of the different recommendations to the Canadian Forces Health Services and other aspects of the military healthcare system. And I guess what I would like to know is, how could the model be used for studying reforms to healthcare in the Canadian Armed Forces? I know that in some areas we are dealing with structural deficits, especially in some professions like mental health care providers. These would be personnel on the base, but it could also be like the infrastructure used to support them. But again, does this factor into the personnel costs and so on? Can you delve into that for me, please?
So the model is intended to look at what happens to number of personnel as well as the expenditures if you change some of the military capabilities. If the government is looking at changing the system or the delivery system or model or the package of healthcare coverage for CAF personnel, then the model is not the appropriate tool to look at that and consider the best approach. It's intended to focus on changes to military capabilities as opposed to being used for accessory or indirect costs such as healthcare for Canadian Armed Forces personnel.
So those, if you are a service member, my father used to be a member of the Canadian Armed Forces. He was a base doctor. Of course, we've got many nurses that serve in the forces as well. And sometimes you would have some mental health care providers who are civilian employees of DND. So they are all considered to be in the indirect category in support of direct action?
There would be some in the indirect categories, but also as well in overhead.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
You don't trust mine?
Well, so I know how much time I've got left, Mr. Chair. So I want to return to the Victoria class submarines. So we know that we are generally lucky to have one that's operational at any moment, and yet this is a direct expense. Again, just so that we understand, is the entire program a direct expense, or how does this measure when such an extraordinary amount of money is spent on the maintenance and the non-operational time that the individual units have?
So the subs, as I understand it, and Chris and Benyam can correct me if I'm wrong, the submarines themselves and the personnel on board would be direct, but the base and the expenditures at the base would be either indirect or overhead, depending on the precise nature of...
It's actually overhead, not indirect.
Some of it could be overhead. As Benyam indicated in response to your previous question, the commander at the base could, for example, be attributed in part to overhead costs for the submarines. Okay?
Okay, all right. So boy, the different grades, direct, indirect, or how you classify these things really weighs into how the ratios work.
I gave examples here that may not be the best examples, but overhead could also be the research and development attached to that. Maybe not that much in the case of subs, but intelligence or other types of expenditures. So we did a very refined, there were thousands of lines that were attached to every single military capability, thanks to the granular data that DND provided us with. So I'm not using the best example because I'm not intimately aware of every single one of these lines, but if you want to have an offline conversation, I'm sure these two gentlemen would be more than happy to give you more accurate examples.
Okay, I mean, I picked the submarines because it's already come up, and it's one that is, I think, an obvious concern. 2019, we had 0 subs that were deployable or at sea for even one day. But yeah, there were significant expenditures on this equipment, and I don't know. I would hope that wouldn't be reported as direct expenditure because there are no teeth there's no teeth on a submarine that is on dry land or confined to harbor.
Yeah, that reminds me of a vocabulary that I learned in another report on dental care. It's indentured or something like that, no teeth at all, and that would be a good analogy for that specific military capability. More seriously, though, that our tool would be based on historical data. So if there's a year where there was virtually no expenditures, that would be reflected in the data.
Okay.
But it's averaged over 6 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Average over 6
Okay,
years.
well, it's not that there's no expenditures when this equipment is not in the water. I appreciate having the information. We as parliamentarians, I think, having tools from the officers of Parliament who help all MPs do their jobs and hold the government to account. And I do appreciate it. I know there's been some of the questions that have been raised seem to question the utility of what you're doing, and I'd like to make sure the record indicates my support for your office and what you do. I've got 1 minute left. James has got one question then.
So just a question to you. So using the submarines as an example, so maintenance, repair, and overhaul is direct or indirect cost, or is it overhead?
So some of the maintenance that is done at fleet maintenance facility would be shown as an overhead. cost associated with what National Defense terms as national procurement, which is actually amount of money they would spend on fixing the submarine, because the submarine is the capability we're looking at. That would show up as an expenditure.
So a life extension project of a frigate or a CF-18 fighter jet would be what?
That's capital.
capital.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. That was a toothless question. You're funny. That was pretty bad, eh? Yeah. Mr. Fisher? Oh, Mr. Cullen?
I'll take it.
Yeah.
We gave Pat 5 minutes yesterday.
Okay. Well,
He's frozen.
Who are we going to now? Can you hear me okay?
You are. You're it.
Oh, perfect. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to get back to the program itself. There's been a lot of questions today, mostly around things unrelated to the force structure model, so I'll get back to that. If I could, Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask.
Hang on for a second, Chad. Hang on for a second. What's the problem?
Les interprètes nous disent que les micros doivent être
Interpreters are saying that microphones in the room must be turned off, otherwise they can't interpret.
Mais je pense que la traduction avait.
I believe that simultaneous interpretation did start again.
Am I good to go?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just back to the force structure model. In looking at the reductions that our constituents and our committee members and other parliamentarians can use in terms of those sliding scales, I was someone who had to live through that political fad known as defund the police, and I had the opportunity to work with our police chief in terms of the calls for a 20% reduction in the police service. And at my request, the chief came forward to show what a 20% reduction would look like. Much like I think if we had that sliding scale, a lot of people during that time period might have used the model and the interactive model that has been placed online and made available to us. And what I found when that 20% reduction report came forward was it was not as simple as just a 1-for-1 ratio. In terms of if you wanted to decrease the police budget by 20%, it meant much more in terms of a service reduction perspective than just a 20% cut. And so if you were to take, as a for instance, 20% of our workforce out of commission, it would mean a 35 to 40% reduction in services to the community. I could go through the list. We don't have time today, but I could give examples in terms of the services that residents would live without because of that. And so I'm just wondering if I could, Mr. Chair, to our delegation, in terms of if I was to ask someone in the service who's dealing with budgets as to whether it's as simple as just sliding the scale 20% one way or 10% another way, whether that accurately reflects the options that are available to those that create our budgets and deliver our services, I would believe that those who answer the question would say it's not that simple. And so can you comment on that in terms of the accuracy of using that sliding scale when budgets, as you've tried to, and I think at times even struggled to relay to us in terms of how you've modeled this, they're very complex and it's just not that simple. And so can you comment on that?
Certainly. So if one was to look at the tool and try to use it to determine how easy or difficult it would be to decrease the budget of national defense by a number of billions, I don't think it's intended to do that. Somebody who would want to reduce spending at DND, for example, would probably want to do a much deeper dive than just use a calculator or a tool. The tool is meant to provide an idea as to how much it would cost to increase capabilities or decrease capabilities for specific military objects. But doing a budget exercise, a wholesome budget exercise, whether it be increasing funding or decreasing funding, people would use something much more refined than a calculator. So it's intended to provide a tool and information for parliamentarians, but it's not meant to be used as the basis for decision making when it comes to deciding where or how to increase or decrease funding at DND.
I'm sorry then, I'm not certain this whole exercise was based on budget numbers. If it's not for the purposes of the trade-offs, I think the trade-offs are the best word you had in your report in terms of accurately describing what these tools allow us to do. You increase in one area, you're forced, I think, in other areas to decrease in order to whatever the budget number is for that specific year or past years. How do you? I'm not certain how to rationalize that in terms of why am I using these tools, if not for the purposes of trying to determine enhancing services in one or more areas. And when you do that, there's dominoes fall the other way in terms of, you're taking money out of one area to increase in another. There are implications, and I don't think you get any detailed information in this exercise in terms of informing you, whoever's using these sliding scales, as to what the implications are if you were to make whatever changes are in your mind when you're playing with this online tool that you've provided.
You can certainly use the tool to make these trade-offs. What I'm saying is that you also, and I didn't say, but what I meant is that you also have to look at what you want to do with the forces. If you want to increase, for strategic reasons, some types of capabilities, you also have to look at what you want to do with your defense policy, is what I didn't say, but I meant. So the tool is very useful in determining the trade-offs, but you have to do that keeping in mind that it will have geopolitical and policy implications, and the tool is obviously not built to do that. So doing a reduction or an expansion exercise will be possible to do that with the tool. How much it would cost you or how much it would free up in terms of resources, but it doesn't take into account the other considerations, is what I should have said, and I didn't say in my previous answer.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. And before Mr. Bazan moves his motion, Chair has a question, and that has to do with after the combat ships and maybe the F-35s, the largest single expenditure is going to be on the NORAD modernization, particularly the over-the-horizon. And that strikes me as tail or indirect rather than direct, because there's no lethality to that capability. Yet without that capability, the lethality is really rendered useless. So in your direct, indirect analysis, does that go into the indirect pile and not the direct pile? And then if it does, then that will, if you will, move the numbers around or skew the numbers once again?
If you're talking about the F-35s and the new warships, these would both go in the direct. There would be some indirect costs associated with that, obviously, like the support that these ships would need, like the refueling at sea, same with the fighter jets, the refueling in the air. But the F-35s themselves and the warships would clearly and would add to the tooth part, so the capabilities.
But the over-the-horizon radar, the cost of NORAD modernization, the sighting of all of the new ability to detect threat, that's indirect.
Generally speaking, reconnaissance is indirect, although it can vary on the specifics, but yes. And I'm not being kicked under the table, so that means...
Well, I'm glad to see you're not being kicked under the table. Yeah.
just before we close, Mr. Penny indicated he knew that this $15 billion black hole wasn't some worm in outer space. He knows what we're referring to.
Okay.
And could he provide us with a response of whether or not they found it, and if they found it, what it was used for?
Okay. Is that reasonable?
Well, I'm glad I'm put on the spot. But I think I could, I recall this issue being raised at the time. I recall doing analysis on it. I don't have the answer with me to relate to you. I absolutely can. I will. Yeah.
Question, but we are running out of time, and Mr. Bazan's getting quite anxious. So on behalf of the committee, I do want to thank you for your testimony. You've given us a lot to think about. In fact, sometimes it's quite perplexing. But we do appreciate not only your contribution to this committee, but to the functioning of Parliament. You are, I'm not sure you fall quite in the category of essential service, but certainly you certainly approach essential service, and it makes our jobs much more informed and allows us to make decisions. So thank you, all three of you, for your contribution. So, Mr. Bazan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to move the following motion, which I gave notice of on October 2nd. That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study of the almost $1 billion cuts to the Canadian Armed Forces and the impact this will have, that the committee hold a minimum of 3 meetings on the topic, that the committee invite the President of the Treasury Board, the Minister of National Defence, and the Chief of the Defence Staff to appear before the committee, and the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House. And if I can just speak to that for a minute. As we know, that it was announced that the government's going to find almost $1 billion. The Liberals have asked the Department of National Defence to find those monies. And we had the Chief of Defence Staff here saying that this was going to have a very large impact on the operations of the Canadian Armed Forces. As he said at committee, that he's had some very difficult conversations with the commanding officers of all 3 services, Air Force, Army, and Navy, and that they are having trouble communicating this back to their people, and that's a direct quote. So I would just say that, based upon the concerns that are being raised by the Canadian Armed Forces, based upon the efforts that are supposed to be made to get Canada to the NATO 2% metric, knowing that we just found out this week that the public accounts have been tabled with Parliament and that last year the budget lapsed another $1.5 billion in defence spending, knowing that $2.5 billion lapsed in the year previous. A total of over $10 billion has now been cut from our Canadian Armed Forces, and those dollars aren't being reinvested back in. The government's always talked the game, but their actions speak louder than words. And I don't believe that the Prime Minister Trudeau is at all interested in supporting our troops or making our Canadian Armed Forces more capable in light of a very dangerous world that we live in, especially as we saw in today's headlines, General Eyre talking about that that Russia and China consider themselves at war with the West, and that includes us as Canada. So if we are under that level of threat, never mind what's going on in the Middle East with the war in Israel against the terrorist organization Hamas, never mind what our responsibilities to NATO on the eastern flank and Latvia, and to help our allies in Ukraine. We need to make sure that these cuts that the Liberals are bringing down on the Canadian Armed Forces are not undermining our ability and capability.
I see Lalonde, Kelly, Fisher.
I know that time is running out, but I would really like to suspend. I do have 2 members, and we just needed to. Overall, I think we are somewhat comfortable with aspect of the intent. There's an aspect that we would propose amendment. I would just ask the chair to suspend for a minute.
I can suspend for more than a minute. Is minute's good?
Actually, 10 would be great.
Okay. We're suspended. We're suspended then.
Yes. So thank you very much for allowing me to have a conversation with our team and getting some clarity. As I said, I think overall the intent of the motion has very strong merits in the sense that, it was on notice and we knew it was coming. But I just have some hesitation to say yay to the way it is written right now. So we would like to propose some amendment, actually very friendly amendment. Well, there are always friendly amendment coming from me, Mr. Chair. So I'm just going to go back because I want to make sure I'm reading it exactly the way it is. I do not have the copy of your motion, Mr. Bazan, so I apologize. And for our interpretation, je vais faire certain. So I think my understanding is that pursuant Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study on all defense expenditure since 2013 and their impact on the operational readiness of the Canadian Armed Force, that the committee hold a minimum of 3 meetings for this study, and that the committee invite, Minister of National Defense, Mr. Bill Blair, Deputy Minister Bill Matthews to appear before the committee for the study, and that the committee reports its finding and recommendation to the House.
Okay. Point of order. Okay. Hang on, a point of order. First of all, do we all understand the motion as it's been presented, or the amendment? Okay. Okay. Are we debating the amendment, or are we having a point of order? Point of order. Point of order. Okay.
I believe if you review the amendment that it changes the intent of the motion, which is to review the budget cut. That is. No, she changed it to looking at expenditures, which have already taken place. We're talking about budget cut that was announced.
No, it's just I didn't read it. Oh, so I have to. Sorry, Mr.
We're doing. Read it again.
I apologize for my honorable colleague. Whereas Budget 2023 announced reduction in spending on consultation and other professional services and travel, whereas these reductions will not impact direct benefits and service delivery to Canadian, direct transfers to or other orders of government and Indigenous communities, and the Canadian Armed Forces, and then that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study of all defense expenditures since 2013 and their impact on the operational readiness of the Canadian Armed Forces. That the committee hold a minimum of 3 meetings for this study, and that the committee invites Minister of National Defense, Bill Blair, Chief of Defense Staff, Deputy Minister Bill Matthews, to appear before the committee for the study, and that the committee reports its finding and recommendations to the House. So I apologize for misreading this.
Clarification, the preamble talks about the announced reductions, but the budget cut of $1 billion, but it's not actually part of the motion. The motion starts at that, pursuant 1082. So it still changes intent.
If it changes intent, then it is out of order. But if it doesn't change intent, it is it is in order. Without reading it, I'm unable to determine whether it's in order or out of order. I'm proposing that since I'm going to bring this gavel down at 5:30, that we undertake this discussion on Tuesday in the afternoon after we've complete the health study.
Mr. Chair, if you want to adjourn, then you need to have a motion to adjourn based upon that we are in the middle of a debate on a motion. And the only way committee can adjourn is if there's a motion to adjourn.
I was going to adjourn. I said in 5:30, I'm bringing the gavel down, and I will adjourn. But so we have 2 minutes left. But if people want to carry on the debate at this point.
I'm not sure we can't debate the amendment until you rule on whether it's in order or not.
That's what I was suggesting. That's why it would be better if we adjourn to Tuesday.
Well,
which I'm going to do it in a minute and a half anyways.
I mean, I'm prepared to debate the motion, which I understand that I had already caught your eye and that I am next to speak. But how can I? If I don't know whether are we debating the motion or no? Are we debating the motion or are we debating an amendment?
The amendment's on the
no. Well,
the amendment's on the floor, but the objection has been that it is out of order. I can't determine whether it's in order or out of order until I actually read it, and at which point then we will know whether there's a debate on the amendment, or if it's in order, then there's a debate on the amendment. If it's out of order, then there's not a debate on the amendment. So if you want to use your last 30 seconds debating that.
Well, no, this is a point of order. If you are going to adjourn this meeting and leaving until the next meeting to determine if the amendment is out of order, that fair. We're down to a couple of minutes, and and that's be acceptable at this point to me. But the next meeting is scheduled to be in camera, and the motion. This we would need to debate this in public, not in camera, Chair. So I have no problem just adjourning this now. You can rule on this on Tuesday, but please do so in public, and we can debate it in public. If the amendment is in order, we'll debate the amendment. Otherwise, we'll debate the motion.
Fair.
Mr. Chair, can I just make one final comment on planning ahead?
25 seconds. Yes.
Is that in that case, if we are going to adjourn and you're going to rule on this when we come back next week, I would suggest that we still start off in camera, get our recommendations down the report, and then move into public to then finish off our debate.
That's exactly what I had intended, that we'll finish off the health report, hopefully in camera, and the clerk will make the necessary arrangements to be in public after that. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Love a strong chair.